Hello guys. Welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving to our today's first story, in which OP found the darkest secret about his father's life, and why OP decided to bury the secret again. Now story. I almost wished I hadn't found out. It would be a relief to not have. In a way, I feel like an interloper. A peeping Tom who had come across something they weren't meant to find. I shouldn't have gone through my dad's things. They should have remained buried where I had left them. My name is Liam. I'm a 35-year-old single man who until a month ago had lived the most carefree, happy life imaginable compared to now. I had no worries in my life and had been able to sleep well at night, far from nightmares and tormented thoughts, but not anymore. The recent change in my life had been brought about by a simple, innocent sentence. My father had buried his victims in the backyard. For context, I'm somebody with a successful career in law. I rarely lost cases, and this was one of them. I had been defending a 60-year-old man who had been the picture of innocence. He had been accused of murder by his son, who had come home early one day and seen his dad in the middle of doing the deed. Not believing his eyes, he had blacked out. When he woke up, his dad acted like normal and there were no signs of anything wrong. The son had thought he was going crazy. He had reported what he had seen to the police, who investigated the case and had found a body in the woods near their house. The accused had denied going anywhere near the body. After a lengthy trial, the man had been found guilty when his son stumbled upon an uneven patch of dirt in their backyard. Upon uncovering the dirt, they soon realized that the man had buried dozens of victims there. He had been found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. I had heard that sentence in court, and it had triggered something powerful in my memory. My biological father, Samuel, died when I was a baby. My mother, Rebecca, had decided to remarry when I was 4 years old, and so since I could remember, I have had a dad named Jay. Jay was the sweetest, kindest man imaginable to outsiders. It looked like he was my actual dad. He certainly behaved like it. He had showered me with love, going above and beyond to give me a good life. He had shown up at all of the events, all of the parent-teacher meetings, all of the award ceremonies, everything. He and my mom had tirelessly worked to set up a college fund for me so that I wouldn't have to worry about fees or scholarships. He had always supported me in everything and had taken care of my every need. He had been a remarkably amiable man, never hesitating to answer any questions that I had about life or him. There was just one topic that had been off limits to discuss. When I was 10, I had asked him about his family, about his parents and his siblings. He had grown quiet for a moment, and I had almost thought that he wasn't going to respond. After a while, he told me in a low voice that he didn't have any family anymore, and that made him sad. He told me that he didn't like talking about it, but since I, his son, had asked him, he wanted to at least explain. That was the first and last time he had talked about his life before us. When I had grown older, my mom had mentioned in passing that she knew virtually nothing about his life before he had met her. It never bothered her though, since his actions had shown he was a wonderful man, and so I had never let it bother me either. The man's words caused me to remember that I had once seen Jay in our backyard when I was a teen. He had been staring off into the distance, sitting under the elm tree planted in our backyard. It was a lovely tree, old with wide branches that provided a lot of shade. I had asked him what he was doing there. He had laughed and said that he loved the tree, and in the future, he might bury some treasure here for me to find. Like all teenagers, I had been up in my troubles at that time and had paid him no mind, but now there seemed to be an odd sensation inside of me. I wondered if Jay had ever done what he said and buried something under the tree. I was overthinking things, but the case had caused me to miss him terribly. You see, 4 years ago, my beloved stepdad, Jay, had passed away due to pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed in the later stages, and the disease had gotten worse very quickly. Thankfully, he hadn't suffered much. But on days like these, I missed him terribly and wanted to be near him again. Thinking along these lines, I drove out to our old house on the weekend. My mom had died shortly after Jay, and I lived in the city to be near my job, so the house had been empty for the last few years. I walked all the way around to the back, stopping once I got to the elm tree. It was just like I remembered, and I could almost see Jay sitting here next to me. A crazy idea struck me. I went to the garage, looking for Jay's old garden tools. I got a large shovel and started digging underneath the tree. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had the urge to continue digging. I stopped a few times for breaks since the shade of the tree covered a large circular area. Finally, I struck gold. An hour after I had started, the shovel struck something solid, something made of metal. By the sound it made, 10 minutes later, I had it uncovered. It was an old, rusty box that had been buried here for a very long time. It was held shut by a rusty old lock which I broke with a crowbar. Inside was a surprisingly well-preserved diary. I took the diary inside and after lunch, began to read. August 1982. I hope no one ever finds this. I hope nobody ever reads this diary and uncovers what we did. I wish I can go back in time and stop my sister from leaving, but life doesn't work that way. It's almost 10 years after the incident took place, and I have just now found the courage to tell this tale. When I was 21 years old, my 24-year-old sister, whom I loved dearly, more than anyone else in the world, told us she had a new boyfriend. The boyfriend seemed great on paper. He had a stable job, a career, and a good family. What I didn't know back then was how twisted he was deep inside. That same year, he invited my sister to spend Christmas with him instead of us. As she did every year, my sister had never had such a long relationship before and readily agreed. We were sad that she wouldn't be there to celebrate with us on Christmas, but didn't mind it. The boyfriend lived 2 hours away, in a small town. He and my sister had met right after college, and he worked in the city but had a house in his hometown. That was where they intended to meet up. Christmas came. My parents and I celebrated it together. We missed my sister terribly, but knew we had to let her spread her wings, let her live like an adult. After all, if she was happy, so were we. That all changed once Christmas had gone by. She was supposed to come back and spend the last 2 days of the holidays with us before leaving to go back to her job, which was an hour away. The day she was supposed to come back came and went. There was no sign of her. She hadn't called or texted anything. We tried calling her, but nobody picked up. She had told us reception was a bit spotty where he lived, and so we weren't that worried just yet. None of us knew the boyfriend's phone number, so we couldn't call to confirm with him either. My parents were growing pretty worried by this time, and so we called the police. This was back in the 80s, and they didn't have cameras everywhere. They were unable to trace her whereabouts. They went to the boyfriend to ask him for details, but he denied her having come to visit him. He told them that she had planned to come to meet him but had never shown up. The police then started searching the areas around our house to find her. They didn't have any luck. The case turned cold, and soon they told us they couldn't do anything for us anymore. A mate of mine offered to drive me over to the boyfriend's place to have a look. His name was Henry, and he was my best friend growing up. We did everything together and were thinking of enlisting in the army together soon. We took his truck and drove out to meet my sister's boyfriend. We introduced ourselves when we got there. He told us his name was Patrick and that he was sorry to hear about my sister. He got all teary-eyed, blaming himself for calling her out here. He theorized that she had probably gotten kidnapped or something on the way from our city to his place. He invited us inside and told us that unfortunately there was nothing he could tell us that would be of use. We were sitting in his living room with glasses of iced tea when I saw it. The scarf my sister had gotten for Christmas. It was a woolen, red scarf, and my mother had knitted it herself. It had no identifying marks on it, like her initials, but I was sure it was the same one. I politely thanked Patrick for his time and took Henry outside. After climbing back into his truck, I told him to head home. On the way back, I told him what I had seen. Enraged, Henry said we should head back and take revenge on the bastard. But I told him to stop. We would need to think this through, otherwise we would be caught. The plan gradually took place over the next week. One night, we snuck out of our houses and met up, taking his truck. We drove to Patrick's place. His house was a little secluded, and that worked best. We kicked his door down in the dead of night and kidnapped him. He was sleeping when we entered the house but woke up due to the noises. We used a bit of rope to tie his hands and then his feet, and then taped his mouth shut. My sister had once told me there was an abandoned cabin in the woods near his house. We took him there, still tied up. Once we were there, I took the tape off his mouth. I asked him, calmly, what he had done to my sister. He spat back that we were crazy and that he hadn't done anything, and he was going to tell the police about us lunatics when he got free. I hit him hard across the face and told him that I had seen my sister's scarf at his place. He replied that tea was his scarf and we were mistaken again. I continued to hit him, telling him that after we were done, the police will take over. All we needed was a confession. Henry and I took turns punching him, but he didn't budge. He kept saying that it was his scarf. It was time to pull out the big guns. We got out the other equipment we had brought, holding up a pair of pliers threateningly. Henry moved to stand next to Patrick. Realizing what we were going to do, he begged for us to stop. Henry started with his thumb. Using the pliers to rip off his fingernail, Patrick screamed in pain and pleaded repeatedly, telling us to have mercy on him. His pleas fell on deaf ears. He still wasn't in the mood to confess, so we continued. After all, 10 of his nails had been torn from their roots. He finally uttered something. He screamed that he had lied and my sister had come to his house the day she had gone missing, but she had left after a while, and he hadn't seen her again. He had come to find out later that she was missing, and he had been too scared to say anything to us or the police lest we think he did something to her. I would have accepted his version of the events and stopped the torture if Henry hadn't pulled me aside. He said that there was no way that was the total of what had happened. If what Patrick was saying was true, he would have caved in sooner. There was no reason to endure all that torture and then reveal information that was innocuous and portrayed him in an innocent light. Thinking it over, I agreed. Henry and I discussed what we should do next. We agreed to try another tactic. We tied him up securely, turned off the lights, and told him we were leaving. Before leaving, we left some food and water near him and loosened one of his wrist ties enough that he could feed himself. Again, he begged us not to leave him there. I told him that we would leave him here for a while and maybe he would feel like talking once we came back. We did as we said. We left him there for 3 days. By the time we came back, he was delirious with hunger and thirst. We gave him food and water and asked him again. He stubbornly refused to say anything. Henry and I nodded to each other. We had discussed what we would do if this happened. I pulled out my knife and looked at Patrick. Very well. I told him, if you don't want to talk now, you'll never get to talk again because I'll cut out your tongue. It worked. He started crying and spilled everything. He told us how he had thought my sister cheated on him and he had become enraged. He had confronted her on Christmas, and even though she had denied it, he had been drunk and hadn't believed her. He had killed her in a fit of rage and had buried her in the woods, near where we were right now. At that, a haze of red came before my eyes, and just like him, I couldn't control myself. I plunged my knife down and he was dead in a matter of minutes. Henry and I looked at each other, silently understanding each other. We buried him outside in the woods like he had buried my sister. We never spoke of it again, even to this day. I do not feel any remorse over my actions. Henry and I remain lifelong friends, bonded by this secret. I closed the diary, dumbfounded. That wasn't what I expected. In my heart, I understood what Jay had done. Now he was dead, and the secret should remain buried with him. There was only one thing left to do. Over the following days, I tracked down Henry, who was a grisly old-timer by now. I told him who I was, and a faraway look appeared in his eyes. When I told him that I had read the diary and knew everything that had happened, he smiled savagely, saying that it was what any good friend would have done. He only supported Jay in his time of need, as Jay would have done for him, in accordance with his wishes. I let the past lie and buried the diary again. No good would come out of rehashing the past. All I could hope was that Jay wasn't tormented by anything and he had finally found peace. Now, here is the end of first story. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think about OP's father and his actions in the comments section. I would love to read them. So before moving to the second story, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories. Now, moving to our today's final story, in which OP tells the story about two friends, Steve and John, and how one of them took revenge for the other's misery. Now story. These guys, along with a few others not relevant to this story, were notorious for their yearly trips into the local mountains for fishing and hunting, which is where we got to know them, as my family ran a tourist cabin nearby. The whole area was a protected national park, meaning no roads existed within 30 kilometers. Only a dirt track for tractors, and permission to drive on these roads were very sparingly given out. This will be relevant later. Now, most of these guys owned a cabin up there, but Steve didn't, so in the early years he mostly stayed with John. A few years in, they had a party at one of the guys' cabins and a bunch of hunters from the cabins around joined in. Once they got to talking, Steve overheard a guy who was lamenting how he had so little time to fix up his cabin, which was at the moment just an empty shell with a bed and old, rusty oven. Steve chimed in and said he could fix it up for him if he could use it when the owner wasn't around, which was most of the time anyway. They made the deal, and for the next couple of years, he shined that cabin up until it was luxurious. He insulated, built bunk beds, put in a new oven and cabinets, stocked it with firewood and food, all the essentials. He even made a new chimney, and this was all carried on his back, every piece of material he used. He poured blood, sweat, and lots of money into that place. The owner was getting the value of his cabin tripled for free. After many years, now all in their 60s, Steve started suffering from Alzheimer's disease. He still would hike and fish for a few years, though got lost many times and eventually had to give it up after getting lost and almost freezing to death. In his last summer of using the cabin, he had left it a bit of a mess. Not too surprising in his deteriorating state of mind. Sometime in late summer, John came for a visit at Steve's house. Steve was upset and told him he had gotten an angry phone call from the owner of the cabin, telling him to clean up the mess and to never use the cabin again in a different language, but something like, "Clean this shit up, then get the hell out." Now, John wasn't a man you'd want to mess with. Is well known as a rowdy drunk with a bad temper, even in his 60s as I remember him from when I was a kid. He was a very imposing man, think Bluto from Popeye IRL. He knew how much that place meant to Steve, having spent every summer for decades there fishing, hunting, and drinking together. He had helped him fix it up and had seen how Steve had thought of this cabin as his paradise. Now, not only couldn't he go back because of his disease, but he was shut out from even the hope of going back. But being the decent man he was, even as devastated as he was, he still was upset that he wasn't at least able to go back and clean out after himself. These were old-fashioned country guys, and he felt he had been negligent in his care of the cabin, even if it didn't deserve the reaction it got. This only made John more furious, so he told Steve, "Don't worry, I'll clean it up for you." So he went to the cabin, ripped down the beds, smashed the oven with a sledgehammer, tore down the cabinets, and shattered every plate, glass, and cup. He pulled down the interior of the walls and ripped out the insulation, ripped up the floorboards, and knocked down the chimney. He then took all the rubble outside and burned it, tossing in the lake anything that didn't burn, like the smashed oven. He then called the owner and said, "I've cleaned out all the shit. Now, here is the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know your opinion about this story in the comments section. And what do you think about these old-fashioned country guys and their friendship? So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.